Hey everybody, it's Richard, Tom, and Galem, and we're here with another interesting episode of MillennialX Coffee-Talk. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about social justice. We've got people slowly coming into this one, so we'll be adding them as they come along. But right now, Kyle and James, thanks for joining us. We appreciate you being here. And I want to take a minute and introduce my good friend, public defender, Oscar Bobrow.
Morning.
Our kids are good friends. That's how we've known each other, and I've learned a lot from him, specifically around what's happening in the criminal justice system and with everything going on in the world today. We thought it was time to talk about this. So, Oscar, thanks for joining us.
Welcome. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so just, to let people know that by all means, if you've got questions, we want you to ask them of Oscar. You can ask them of us privately in the chat if you want. If you just want it to be anonymous, that's okay. But Oscar, let's just sort of jump in and get started of like, what is the role of a public defender, right? Like we see it on Law and Order and we see it in movies, and I get the impression that it's not quite like that.
Well, there's some accuracy, but don't believe what you watch on TV. The public defender's job is basically to represent people that can't afford their own lawyer, and in the criminal context. And so if you're arrested for a crime and you're either in jail or ordered to come to court, the first question that the judge will ask is, the judge will tell you you're entitled to have a lawyer represent you. Can you afford to hire your own lawyer? And some people don't know. Most people are like, well, I haven't been in trouble before, or I'm unfamiliar with this. And the judge will then ask financial questions. Are you on government assistance? How much money do you make a month? Do you have debts? Do you have children? Things like that. And the court will do kind of an on-the-spot, quick fiscal assessment. And more often than not, the people that are predominantly arrested are low income or can't afford it. And if it's a very serious case, they really can't afford it because private attorneys charge lots of money for very serious cases. And so our office mans the court, so to speak. And so we usually always have somebody in there. And then the judge will say, okay, well, I'm going to appoint the public defender to represent you. And then hands us a copy of whatever the charging document is. We do a quick assessment, enter a plea of not guilty, because that starts the ball rolling of the next procedure, and then we get a new court date, and then we take it from there. We do everything that you do see on TV. With people that are in custody, we actually try to do interviews beforehand, because we know in the morning, I will get a list at 6 o'clock in the morning or earlier of all the people that have been arrested the night or the 2 days before. And they will list what the charges are. We have a computer system where we can look up to see if these are people we've represented before, or we have any conflict in regard to representing them now, or if they ever have contact with the criminal justice system in our jurisdiction. And then we try to do what we're doing here, iWeb visits at the jail. If we contact the jail and say, hey, the following 5 people are due to be on the afternoon calendar, and they've been charged with X, Y, and Z, can you bring them to a room? It's a private room, and we kind of tell them what's going to happen before they walk into that courtroom and get told what they're charged with.
How many clients do you try to handle, or do you need to handle in the world?
I'm the managing deputy in the office, the branch office that I'm in. I have 11 felony deputies and 3 misdemeanor deputies that are in this office. Each one of those 11 felony deputies has between 40 and 50 open felonies at any given time. And the misdemeanor deputies have between 170 and 200 misdemeanors at any given time. So we have, in my little branch, about 600 misdemeanors and about 550 felonies that are alive at every day. And so things come up, to say the least. And in the main office, the office that's bigger where I used to supervise, has a kind of a larger group, and there are more people in my role that are involved in helping supervise all those people. I also have my own set of cases where I'm going to court. So, you know, we're busy all the time. Things are coming up all the time. People always say, oh, the public defender is, you know, over burdened and under-resourced. I have not found that to be the case. I've found that, you know, you can manage, even when the caseloads get large, you can manage the volume. And, you know, the good thing is the court can only handle one case at a time. And so it can only be on the record in one case at a time. Although there are several, across the street from where I'm seated, there are several courtrooms that are currently up and running with misdemeanor clients and felony clients. And
How do you balance sort of the emotional part of, you know, you're there to defend someone, even if they may be guilty of something, but your job is to make sure they get a fair shake, right? Like, how do you sleep at night?
So
Literally,
that's correct. I mean, if we start parsing out, oh, I'm not going to work as hard for one client versus the other, we will be accused of, you know, either playing favorites, racism, you know, just dropping the ball. The Constitution guarantees everybody the right to a fair trial and a trial of one's peers and a fair proceeding. And, you know, that's our job. We take an oath to uphold the Constitution and to make sure that those rights are protected. If the government, with the resources of the government, can't prove a case against somebody, that either means one of two things. They don't have the evidence to prove it, or they're just not capable. And those things are very much synonymous in how we operate. Our job is to put the government to its test and make sure that everybody is provided with a fair hearing.
Yeah. How do you, so, you know, the big thing that I know you and I've talked offline, and I know an article literally came out yesterday about some work you're doing in the California state legislature about a jury of your peers, right? Yeah. That definition looks really good on paper, but in reality, it doesn't seem to be true. Like, I know when we were setting up this conversation, you know, you had mentioned that so many times, you know, the defendant may be the only person of color, right? Maybe the only Black or African-American person or Hispanic person, and everybody else in the jury is white. How's that justified? Like, I mean, I know that court cases.
It's not. I mean, so the Constitution does require you to have a jury of your peers. This is a developing concept. That's, you know, a jury of one's peers in 1780 whatever was a bunch of all white guys that were landowners. We have come a long way in regard to how we interpret a jury of one's peers and the right to to confront and cross-examine witnesses in a trial. And so California specifically has two lists that they use to summon jurors. They are the Department of Motor Vehicles list and voter registration list. They have, since the 1980s, only used those two lists in order to summon jurors. And in representing people over time, I have seen, my colleagues have seen, as you just said, a vast underrepresentation of minority populations in the pools that come in based on those two lists. And that's for a variety of reasons. There's been a lot of social science studies about that, about the underrepresentation of minority populations in the jury pools, because I'll just give you some of the main reasons. You're not required to have a driver's license, and you have to pay to get it. You're not required to vote. It's up to you to vote. So if you don't choose to engage in those things, you're not going to make it on the list. Well, people that are financially strapped, to say the least, in this country and in this state are more often than not disproportionately represented in the minority communities. And so African Americans and Hispanics, even though the census has a certain percentage of what their populations are in every different county, actually in every different zip code in the state, the people that are summoned are not always going to represent equally, and in fact, always going to represent unequally those percentages in the jury pools. The other problem is, even if you did register to vote or you did have a license, you're not, you don't have to renew your voter registration. And oftentimes, low-income communities move more than people that are well off and can afford homes and stay in the same place for extended periods of time. And you're not required to renew your driver's license for 5 years. It used to be 10 years. And so there's a great deal of summoning for jurors that goes to what we call dead households. And so then the people that do show up are overrepresented in the Caucasian or white community. And so what the legislation that I introduced has to do with 3 decades of fighting this in the courts, because the courts we have done our own studies to show, hey, for example, in the county you and I live in, Richard, in 1989, the California Supreme Court acknowledged that there's an underrepresentation of half of the Black population in the jury pool. And they issued an opinion and said, yes, that's true. We see the statistics and we understand that the jury commissioner has uncovered this, but they're using voter registration and Department of Motor Vehicles. Those lists aren't racist in and of themselves. That's not intentional discrimination. That's just the fact that people aren't registered to vote or people don't have licenses. So we can't blame the jury commission.
But isn't that, so that's more of a socioeconomic issue, right? So
yes, but the problem is, that went on for decades, and we kept showing, and they kept saying, and as recently as 2 years ago, the California Supreme Court, and I actually argued the case, upheld a death penalty verdict where an all-white jury voted to send an African-American man to death, to sentence him to death for homicides that he had committed, where there was a clear, again, underrepresentation based on using those 2 lists. So the legislation that we proposed is to incorporate state tax filers into the group of people that have to be summoned to court. And by incorporating that list, you, one, get a more updated group of people because you file your taxes every year. And you have a more expansive pool, because it's not just people that file, it's anybody with a Social Security number that gets either financial assistance from the state or has some kind of tax identification associated with that number and an income would be subject to the list. So we widen the pools. And right now in the country, 17 other states use state tax filer lists. 33 other states, other than California, use lists in addition to Department of Motor Vehicles, like telephone directories or utility lists or government assistant lists. There are other lists that the government has access to that they could use.
How do you think the current state of affairs, right, with everything that's been going on over the summer around Black Lives Matter, has affected this legislation to be taken, right? For legislators to finally go, okay, we need to do something about this.
Yeah, I mean, as one of my colleagues in San Francisco recently coined the phrase, this is a George Floyd moment. We are taking the tragedy and the focus that's on the inequality in the criminal justice system and the racism that's inherent in it that everyone is seeing and saying, okay, we need to do anti-racist things. We need to fix broken systems. And this legislation, I introduced this legislation in 2016. It died in the Appropriations Committee despite several hearings. We reintroduced it again.
Wait, hold on a second. I want to know, granted, you know, it's tragic and on the George Floyd moment, but why would it not come out of committee? Like, what did you run into? Because I think I'm glad it's out of committee now, right? Like, I'm glad we're going there, but what was that like? Like, what was their rationale?
So on this piece, there really was no opposition politically. The opposition came from the Franchise Tax Board themselves saying, oh, we're going to have to spend money to make sure that we have an address associated with everybody that files a residence address with everybody that files a state tax return. And so that's going to impact us financially, and we're not willing to do that. Blam, it was gone in the Appropriations Committee. I mean, the legislative process is a fascinating thing, which I've learned a lot about in the last 5 years, that there are things that happen behind the scenes and that you have no idea why they happen. I mean, one time this legislation was, last year, this was part of a different piece of legislation that allowed for felons to now serve, ex-felons, people that have served their time and are not on probation or parole anymore, to participate in the jury system. This was part of that. And at the last minute, it went into an Appropriations Committee and it came out absent this piece. And we were like, how did that happen? Well, Appropriations decided. Who in Appropriations decided? Oh, we can't tell you that. And so there's a lot of backdoor stuff that goes on in the halls of the state capitol that is unexplainable, to say the least.
You think,
but
without, you know, I don't want anybody to start Googling and researching who these people are, but do you think when, you know, the Appropriations Committee, you know, says we don't want to spend the money, do you think that that's with any level of racism in it, or do you think it's do you think they're justifying it as a budget thing, or do you think, like,
I think they try to justify things as a budget thing, but they also are lazy. And, you know, if I had to guess, they didn't want to do the work. And there's a lot of things that go on in the legislature, and they make decisions based on whatever their personal preferences are. I reached out to members of the Franchise Tax Board that we had been in discussions with when it disappeared, and said, I don't get what you're doing. There's no political opposition to this. This should have been the law 20 years ago. What do you need to step up. And I got silence in response. And so now, again, this focus on the inequalities that exist in the criminal justice system is giving us, hopefully, the impetus to move these things forward, and these kinds of changes forward.
So now that, and, you know, I'll paraphrase it, but now that, you know, the white suburban areas are paying attention, the appropriations people feel like, okay, now I got to do something.
Well, yeah, and I think that if people are standing in the way, they realize that there'll be a focus on them as to why they're standing in the way and who they are, and, you know, what is their motivation for not doing what is a common sense solution to a long-standing problem.
So I want to shift back to the trial for a little bit, right? So
sure.
we've all talked about, you know, we've all seen it in the movies about jury selection, and, you know, everybody can strike people. You know, you get so many strikes. My interpretation is, you know, the public defender can strike people, and so can you. Like, is that? I mean, are the prosecutors really like, hey, you know what? You're Black, you're African American, you're Hispanic, I don't want you on the jury. Like, do they literally say that out loud?
Great and timely question. There was a study that came out just a few weeks ago. This is also part of legislation that's being introduced by UC Berkeley professor Elizabeth Semmel, called Whitewashing the Jury. And what she and members of her staff, law students at UC Berkeley, did was, for the last, I think it's 20 years, analyze Court of Appeal opinions upholding challenges as, to strikes by prosecutor, or strikes by anybody in criminal cases where the basis for that was race. In other words, if you're in a courtroom and the panel is made up of potentially 12 people and the judge turns to you and says, okay, do you have any challenges based on the conversations we've just had with all these jurors? And somebody says, well, I'm going to strike that person over there. And the other side says, wait a minute, there's like 2 black people in the whole courtroom and you're striking one of them. Why are you doing that? That's called a Batson-Wheeler challenge or Batson-Wheeler-Johnson. It's based on cases that say you're not allowed to make challenges based on race. And so the judge then has to analyze, well, what's your reason for striking that person? And the prosecutor is put on the spot to say what they did it for. And what the study that was done by UC Berkeley showed was that more often than not, the kinds of answers are, well, I didn't like their body language, they had their arms folded, they were wearing too much jewelry, they knew somebody who had a bad experience in the criminal justice system. Although they said they could put that aside and be fair, I don't trust them. And so what this study showed was that in 72% of all of the strikes that were done over the last 20 years, they were done by prosecutors against African Americans or Hispanics. And the reasons were the kind of things I just said. And yet the Court of Appeal has upheld those strikes. So the state of Washington, about 3 years ago, came up with a solution for a similar thing happening there. And they said those kinds of reasons, body language, location of residence, high crime area, prior bad conduct, prior bad experience with law enforcement are no longer valid reasons. You can't kick people off just for that because what you're doing is hiding racism. And we're going to stop that. And we're going to impose a rule. And the state of Washington did impose a rule and listed a whole bunch of reasons as to why you're not allowed to give those as answers when you're challenged as to why did you just strike that person of color that's a potential juror in this process. And California has pending in the legislature Senate Bill 3070 to sort of mirror what they did in the state of Washington, to preclude people from making race-based challenges, masking them.
Do you know if in Washington they've seen an increase in balance?
I don't know that it's been studied yet,
Okay.
but I know that it's.
What do you? So you know these judges, right? Like at some point, I want you to be a judge, because I know you have strong opinions, but what are the judges' rationales? Like, are they really hiding behind legal precedents? Right.
So, it's an interesting dilemma, because when you're up there and one side is accusing the other side of making a racist move in regard to the process, the judges don't want to be seen as, oh, you're right, he's a racist. What he just did was racist. And so they go out of their way to rubber stamp the decisions and the decision making of the prosecutor. I mean, I can tell you of just a couple of quick examples that I personally experienced. In a death penalty case I tried in 1997, after we had gone through the death penalty trials, take a long time to pick a jury because you have to get people that say that they believe that the death penalty can be an appropriate punishment. And so that excludes a large portion of people to begin with. But in a capital case where an African-American woman was struck, and this was like the second or third one that the prosecutor had struck, I accused them of, trying to my client was African-American, of trying to make sure that there are no African-Americans on this jury, and challenged his reasoning. And the answers that juror had given were, in my opinion, incredibly benign. She had no real experience with the criminal justice system. She had no opinions that were negative about how the process worked. And I believe that sincerely that this strike was based on race. The prosecutor asked for a recess so that he could go get his notes to tell the judge why it was that he had struck this woman, and came back and made up a bunch of hooey, basically, that the judge, at the time, the only solution to doing that, if he grants my objection, is to start all over. And that judge was not going to start all over again. There are now solutions where you can just make that juror stay if you find it's based on race, but at the time, it would have made them go back to scratch and start the process again. But, they were trying to kill my client. And so when you think about what our obligation is, and I believe, in this instance, not only was I doing everything possible to win the case, but I believe that the homicide that occurred was a self-defense shootout and did not warrant a capital verdict, and that he was defending his life when he fired the weapon that was involved in this case. And so, but the judge upheld the strike. And similar circumstances. I tried a 3 strikes case in the early 2000s. Guy was charged with being part of a group of people involved in a homicide. There was an elderly African-American man on the jury and a younger one. The elderly man was it was difficult for him to stay awake because, the jury selection is kind of long and boring. And so he was, and all the jurors are required to pay attention to what's happening in the courtroom at all times, that he was, during jury selection, kind of nodding off. And we were taking breaks in order for him to be refreshed and attentive. And the other African-American man asked to go into chambers, and he said, that guy's clearly having a hard time, and you guys seem to be having a hard time with him, and I just wanted to let you know that I know that. And we were like, thank you very much, and he left. And the prosecutor then turned to the judge and said, I'm moving to strike him because he's showing, kind of affiliation with this other man, and I believe that that's going to be a strike against me. And it just was a made-up reason. And the judge agreed with it. And they let him go over my objection. And it's that kind of process that has gone on for years, where judges and prosecutors, and many of the judges that sit are former prosecutors, that rubber stamp each other in regard to this exclusion of the minority population's participation in the jury selection process. So the legislation I introduced, the legislation that's pending in regard to the limitation of the ability to strike people, is all designed to put an end to trying to whitewash the jury, as we call it, to making sure that people that are accused are tried by a jury of their peers, or at least have a better shot at getting a jury of their peers than they currently do in our state.
Oscar, can you talk a little bit about what it's like from an emotional standpoint dealing with folks that we've talked about a few different death penalty cases where someone's life is on the line of how you and how everything goes in a court situation, and even how that is depending on what your feelings are about the case or what happened in the situation, and how you're drawn into that and how you're able to handle that from an emotional and mindset standpoint.
Sure. So when I tried my first death penalty case in the mid 1990s, I had black hair, and as you can see, it has taken this work has taken its toll. That this isn't part genetic, but You know, it is emotionally draining, physically draining, intellectually draining experience of being a trial lawyer, of having to defend people who potentially could have their life taken at the end of a proceeding, or clearly have their liberty taken for extended periods of time. And, you know, but it's, we bring people in at the lowest level. When they're out of law school, they start with misdemeanor cases, and we see how they do. And they try misdemeanor cases, drunk driving things, small theft cases, and you learn the skills for in a courtroom where the stakes are not so high. And as you kind of rise up in the ranks, the difficulty and the seriousness of the people that you're representing increases until you get to a level where you're doing the most serious stuff. I've been doing the most serious stuff for a really long time, although now I am in more of a managerial role. But it does, you know, it takes its toll on everybody. These back and forths that I've been describing with the court and with the prosecutors and with jurors, you know, you're having this intellectual discourse trying to ensure that the person that is seated next to you, whose life is basically in your hands or whose liberty is in your hands, is getting a fair proceeding. And, you know, our resources are not equivalent to the state's resources. The prosecutors have the police, they have their own independent investigators. They have a force of law enforcement that helps them present their case. We have investigators, our own group of investigators, but they are they don't have the wherewithal that a district attorney's office has. You know, for example, if a witness says to our investigator, "I'm not coming," and there's nothing you can do about it, and you know, we say, "Well, here's a subpoena," and they say, you know, "Take your subpoena and, you know, put it where the sun doesn't shine." We can go to court and say, you know, "This happened, and we want you to help enforce it." But if you're the police that are serving that subpoena and that person says that thing, they can say, "Great, put your hands behind your back and we'll go see the judge now, and he'll take care of this." And so the resources and the force behind those resources are dramatically different. That's not to say that we don't, you know, accomplish and provide fair and positive representation and go out of our way to get what we need to get. But it is more difficult in many instances. And those kinds of things take toll on your psyche, on your, you know, on your intellectual capacities when you're trying to balance a whole bunch of other things at the same time. But, you know, it's like anything. I mean, I equate trial work to surgery. And what a surgeon does when somebody's kind of cut open on the table is they're doing a lot of things at once, and based on their historical training, they're able to, you know, save people's lives. And based on our training, we are in many respects able to save people's lives. And when we can't, it's either because the evidence is overwhelming or the person is absolutely guilty of what they're charged with, or for some other reason. And there are people that are wrongfully convicted. There are also people that are wrongfully acquitted. But that's just the nature of human interactions in the courtroom and in the criminal justice system.
Oscar, I'm curious to know what got you into this profession to begin with, you know, 25 plus years ago. What was the reason? Because this is not something that everyone could do or would want to do.
You know, I've always, I grew up in a very diverse area of the country. My neighborhood when I was a kid was one of the most integrated places in the United States, a little area right outside of New York City. And I think watching the politics of this country as in my formative years. When I was high school and early years of college, Richard Nixon was the president. And the corruption that I saw, the things that happened with the Vietnam War with friends of mine and older brothers of friends of mine, and how I felt about the system kind of geared me toward wanting to be involved in a way where I felt I could do something different. And then when I got to law school, I actually, before I got to law school, I was in, I got a couple of political science degrees and then worked for a congressman here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and exposed me to a number of injustices, I thought, in the criminal justice system. And then when I got to law school, my first year in the criminal law class, we took a trip to a local prison right outside of Washington, D.C. called Lorton. It's where they housed all the people that were arrested for crimes in the District of Columbia. And I had a few conversations with people in there, and that's kind of what put me over the edge. And I kind of never looked back. And I've been doing this for.
What do you,
So,
oh, go ahead, Gail, sorry.
yeah, I just wanted to know too, like, so you're a public defender right now.
Yeah.
Have you also worked as a prosecutor, or I just want to understand, like, why would you choose one over the other? Like, what's the personal differences of choice?
One is Jews don't accuse, in my opinion, and I could never be on the side of what I believe is a government agency that is so inherently entrenched in systematic discrimination that it can't get out of it. And I would not devote my life to that. And you know, it's funny that there was an election just this year where Chesa Boudin, who was a former public defender in San Francisco, is now the San Francisco district attorney. And he is attempting to turn things around there. And I commend him for what he's done and how he's handling that position. And there are people around the country that are doing similar things. The district attorney in Philadelphia is Larry Krasner is a former deputy public defender. And these people are insightful and visionary and trying to make systematic changes. But for me personally, I have always felt that I'm justified on this side of the table. It's more akin to who I am as a human being. It's kind of helping the underdog. And I've trained myself to be the advocate for this side of the criminal justice system. I don't think that training could go away. I don't believe I could be a prosecutor, at least not an effective.
What are things that, we always sort of say act locally, right? What can the average person do, right? If they want to support these kinds of things, right? How do we even know if this kind of stuff's in our state legislature? I wouldn't know unless you told me. I went
Well, it's a question of trying to keep track of the legislative process, and the average person doesn't know. The average person has no idea what's going on other than what's on the news. And, fortunately and unfortunately, because of the circumstances surrounding it, a spotlight has been placed on the criminal justice system and the mechanisms of the criminal justice system and over-policing in underprivileged communities. I just read this morning that the city of Berkeley passed a local rule to say that the police departments should no longer be responsible for issuing moving violations in the city limits. And they're cutting the police department's budget because of what they believe is the inherent racism that is been uncovered in this reexamination of how we are policing, of how many people of color are stopped in low-income communities for things like broken taillights, and one thing leads to another, and that's where all the violence and confrontation takes place. The majority of it in the street between the average minority citizen and the police. And I do think there is credible, logical evaluations of over-policing throughout the country. I mean, the resources of police departments, the financial resources of police departments are devoted primarily to low-income communities. And the average response is, well, but that's where all the violence is. I don't know that that's necessarily true, that low-income communities are more violent than affluent communities. But the interaction with the police, it's not community policing, it's kind of like a police state. And given what people have seen, would you want to call the police in your community if you live in a low-income community and you believe that you're unsafe? Would you call the police now, given how it has been uncovered, the police respond in many instances and how things go out of whack? So, we need to do a lot more rethinking and reshaping. And so, your question about how do you know? I think you got to teach yourself. You got to be a concerned citizen and reach out to local legislatures. They all have websites. They all have lists of things that they're working on, things that they're doing, issues that they're concerned with.
What do we even Google? Like I wouldn't even know. Am I Googling criminal justice reform, Solano County? Am I what am I don't even know what I'm supposed to look for.
Well, I mean, if you want to know what your local representatives, people that are representing your interests, are doing, you can go on a map and Google your zip code and representative, and you'll come up with it will come up with who your state senator is, who your state assembly person is, who your U.S. congressperson is, and then you can go on their websites and see what they're doing. You can Google on their websites criminal justice reform. What are they involved in? Our local state senator, who's also a member of our Temple, is Steve Glazer. He has been involved in some criminal justice reform. Some of it I'm not crazy about. He has pushed things on behalf of the district attorney of Alameda County. I've seen them sit side by side at council table or at legislative hearings where he's pushing for more aggressive laws that would lock more people up, basically. And it's so funny. I'll show you something. This is the 2020 California edition of the Penal Code. When I started working, this thing was about that fat, and it is now this fat, because people sit around and think, what can we, you would not believe how thin these pages are and how much language there is on the average page. But this is all the things that you could be charged with in the state of California. I mean, it's amazing. And what you could be sentenced to and how much you could be sentenced to. And so we have, Jerry Brown used to always veto legislation if it had any aspect of it in regard to criminal justice where it was already covered. Brown would have kind of a road. I have rejected this piece of legislation because there are already X, Y, and Z statutes on the penal code that cover this activity. We don't need another law. And that's what a lot of legislators do, is they come in and they say, oh, I'm going to, make an issue out of some incident that happened in my community, and I'm going to create a new law. And it's, well, there's already 5 different ways to charge somebody for that behavior, and so you don't need another one. But that's kind of political grandstanding that goes on, and for people that are, running for re-election.
I want to see if anybody's got a question they want to ask or comment. Oscar, we got to wrap it up in the next 5 or 7 minutes, but
Okay.
One, thank you for joining us. But does anybody have a question or comment? If not, I've got a couple more, but I want to open the floor for sure.
Sure, I'll bite. When you were talking about the challenges and getting people stricken from juries, is even if they don't ask something that is blatantly racist, there are probably questions that they can ask that are going to significantly skew that way, but aren't viewed as being a racist type question. I'm guessing you're more savvy prosecutors. That's how they're going to try to get around some of those things. Is that an accurate depiction, or am I just?
Yeah, no, there are ways to craft questions where you draw out opinions of people and who they really are. I mean, I'll tell you, when I first stand up in a courtroom, I ask people to do 2 things. One is to understand that there is no right and wrong answer in regard to any of the questions that are going to be posed. Everybody is who they are, and we want to know who you are in order to make an informed decision as to whether or not you're right for the case. And then I ask you to think of yourself or someone you care very much about to be seated where the person is who's been accused of the criminal offense that the judge has just told you this trial is all about. And imagine yourself in that position. And then imagine the jury is made up of 12 people that think about the world the way you do, that have had your life experiences, your contacts or non-contacts with the criminal justice system, your understanding of the politics of the world, and tell us as honestly as you can, would you feel comfortable being seated in that position with 12 people that have your life experiences, your thoughts, your everything that's happened to you, deciding your fate? And if you are hesitating in any way or would be concerned about a group of 12 people that have that, then just tell us. There's no right and wrong answer. And we try to get people to be forthcoming. There are people, unfortunately, it's a big world, and there are people that listen to that and think, I'm not telling him anything. I'm going to get on this jury and vote guilty. There are people like that. But there are other people that, are honest about, okay, I'm not suited for this. And I try to bring out things that happened to me along the way. I mean, a long, long time ago, I lost somebody to a tragic accident in San Francisco who fell through a rotten railing from 3 stories up and died. It was something that rocked my life for a very long time. And if I were called to sit on a jury where it's a civil case, where you're going to decide was something was a deck constructed improperly, or was a construction default the result of somebody experiencing a death, you don't want me. Not because I'm not a fair and objective, reasonable person, because this is going to bring up some stuff that makes me, tear up, that makes me emotional, that makes me not objective. And so, you try to convey to the rest of the panel that this is a very serious thing that we're all dealing with. And we can't, in the time period that we have, know everything that's happened to you. But we can tell you what this case is about, what the factual scenario that may develop in front of you is. And are those issues going to rise up in you in a way that keeps you from being objective in any way? And so I think there's a way to bring that out, to try to get fair jurors. I've had a lot of success with people uncovering things about themselves. And again, we tell them, look, you don't even have to tell us what it is. You could just say, I've thought about this. There's absolutely no way I can be fair or I can be objective. And so I'm going to ask to be excused. And they're out. And so, it's that kind of trying to instill in potential jurors a sense of objectivity that they either can or cannot be involved in when they become people that decide the fate of one of their fellow citizens.
That's a great question, Chris. Thank you so much. We need to wrap it up, but Oscar, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was very educational and just, super informative. So thank you so much. Thanks everybody for showing up and attending. Yes, we've recorded it, so we will be releasing it as soon as possible. But please join us again next week for the next MillennialX Coffee Talk. Tom, Galem, you guys have anything you want to add real quick?
No, I just want to say thanks to everyone for showing up. Obviously, thanks to Oscar for helping to educate us. I thought it was a great conversation. A lot of stuff that pretty much I didn't know any of this. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing everything. And again, thanks to everyone for showing up and hope to see you again next week.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Kyle, also, you brought up a good point here. You shared a link here with opinions on tech jumping in to help, post-incarceration. It's a really good conversation and something that I think we can bring up in another MillennialX Coffee Talk. But happy to have a side conversation with you about that as well. And if anyone is interested in joining me in my weekly debrief video, I'm going to do that right after this. It only takes like 2 minutes. It's usually what I keep it to, 2 to 3 minutes. So feel free to just ping me, here or on LinkedIn and let me know. And Oscar, thank you so much for taking the time with us this morning for you. And really, really valuable and good conversation that we had today. Thank you.
Good to meet all of you. Good luck with everything. Everybody stay safe.
Thanks.